Welcome to This Explainer, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled you're tuning in today because we are investigating what is, without a doubt, the ultimate locked room mystery. I mean, think about it. It's the one single experience every human being throughout history shares, and yet it's still the most profound question mark of our entire existence. Today we're looking at the fascinating, highly verified accounts of people who have walked right up to the very edge of life, and in a lot of cases, they actually crossed over it, only to come back. We're going to dig into the data, the medical records, and the just extraordinary consistencies in their stories, all to try and piece together exactly what happens when the human body finally shuts down.
So I want you to just pause for a second and put yourself in this position. Really ask yourself, what does dying actually feel like? Will it hurt? Will you even know it's happening? Or does the screen just abruptly go black? For a very long time, we could really only guess. But thanks to modern resuscitation medicine, we now have thousands of people who essentially died and were brought back. And honestly, the most astonishing part of all this, they keep saying the exact same thing over and over again.
Okay, let's dive right into this timeline. If you die the way most people do, which is slowly, in a bed, the first really strange thing actually happens while you're asleep. Weeks before, patients start having these incredibly vivid dreams of the dead. A hospice physician named Dr. Christopher Kerr documented this in over 1,400 patients. Nearly 90% of them reported visions of deceased loved ones, like a mother who's been gone for 30 years, just sitting right there on the edge of the bed. And it's reported to be deeply comforting. Then, days before, there's often this wild surge called terminal lucidity. Patients with advanced dementia will suddenly just wake up, totally clear and present. They're cracking jokes, saying their goodbyes, right before their supposedly destroyed brains shut down again. Then, hours before, the body simply powers down the systems it doesn't need. Hunger and thirst, they just switch off. Minutes before, breathing pauses, stretches out, and finally, the heart stops. But here's the huge takeaway from this timeline. In 2020, researchers at the University of British Columbia found that the very last thread connecting a dying person to this world is hearing. Even when someone is totally unresponsive, their brain is still tracking sounds. You can't answer, but your loved one's voices, they're still arriving.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the massive contrast between what's happening on the outside versus the inside. Externally, the medical view is super straightforward. Within about 10 seconds of the heart stopping, the brain just runs out of usable oxygen. Every measurable sign of consciousness switches off. The monitors flatline, someone writes down the time of death, right? But internally, the experiential view tells a completely different story. Back in 2001, there was this landmark study published in The Lancet by a Dutch cardiologist named Pim van Lommel. He looked at 344 cardiac arrest survivors, and from the inside, they insist the story is literally just getting started. They are reporting nothingness. They report highly structured, incredibly vivid experiences that kick off with just the deepest calm imaginable.
And survivors who come back with memories consistently describe a sequence built from the exact same reoccurring parts. First, the pain just switches off. Whatever absolute agony the body was in a second ago, it's gone, like someone just flipped a breaker. Next, they describe rising up out of their body. They watch their own resuscitation from up near the ceiling with this strange, detached curiosity. Then comes the famous tunnel, and a light that they describe as brighter than anything on Earth, but oddly, it doesn't hurt to look at. From there, a lot of people experience a life review. But guys, it's not like watching a movie. You actually feel your life from both sides at once. You feel every kindness you gave and every wound you caused, but replayed from inside the other person's skin. It's wild. Finally, they reach a border. Sometimes it's a river, sometimes just a line in the grass, and they know that crossing it means staying there forever.
But what elevates this from just a mere hallucination to a true, undeniable locked room mystery are the verified details these experiencers bring back. For instance, one of Dr. Van Lommel's patients was brought into the hospital deep in a coma. During CPR, a nurse took out his dentures and dropped them into a very specific drawer of a crash cart. Well, over a week later, the man wakes up, points to the nurse, and tells her exactly which drawer his teeth are in, saying he watched her do it from above. Or take Dr. Bruce Grayson, a really highly respected psychiatrist. In the 1970s, he rushed to treat an overdosed college student, and he happened to have a spaghetti sauce stain on his tie. The student never woke up that night. Yet the next morning, she perfectly described a conversation Dr. Grayson had all the way down the hall with her roommate and specifically called out that spaghetti stain on his tie.
These accounts are universally consistent. It literally doesn't matter who it happens to. Cardiologists are hearing the exact same stories from truck drivers and priests. A pediatrician in Seattle even documented this in kids as young as 3 years old. I mean, kids way too young to have any cultural knowledge of the light or life reviews were drawing exactly that in crayon. And time in this state, It completely stops behaving like a straight line. But maybe most incredibly, scientists at the University of Liège compared these near-death memories against memories of real, verified events from those exact same patients. And the near-death memories actually scored higher. They had more detail, richer emotion. The brain literally files these events as being more real than actual waking life.
So obviously, science does have logical, biological explanations for all this. And as critical thinkers, we have to put those to the test. Could it just be oxygen starvation creating tunnel vision? Or perhaps the brain just floods itself with a massive DMT release for one final psychedelic trip? Or maybe it's a power surge, like there was a 2022 study that caught an 87-year-old man's brain firing off bursts of gamma waves right as his heart stopped. Basically a hallucinated fireworks display, right? Now, these are totally valid hypotheses, but when we actually test them against the evidence side by side, we start to see exactly where the biological arguments fall short.
Let's look a little closer at that oxygen starvation theory. When fighter pilots black out in centrifuges, they lose blood flow to the head, and yes, they do report tunnel vision and a floating sensation. But here is the massive yes but to that theory. Pilots wake up twitching, they're completely confused, and their memories are totally garbled and chaotic. In stark contrast, cardiac arrest survivors wake up with crisp, deeply ordered narratives. They can sit down and retell their story 20 years later without changing a single word. Furthermore, patients who are oxygen-starved for even longer periods weren't any more likely to have a near-death experience. The biological input just doesn't match the psychological output.
And then there's the whole issue of timing. In a massive study led by Dr. Sam Parnia that covered over 2,000 cardiac arrests, there is one specific timestamp that completely shatters the biological models: 3 minutes. A 57-year-old man perfectly described his own resuscitation, the machines, the people, the very specific sounds around him, and his memories matched real recorded events stretching 3 full minutes into his cardiac arrest, 3 minutes into a flatline. At that point, the brain should have absolutely nothing left in the tank to produce a conscious experience with, let alone record brand new, perfectly accurate memories of the room.
Which brings us to the cases that just flat out refuse to close. If we are investigating a locked room mystery, this one is the ultimate sealed vault. Meet Pam Reynolds. In 1991, this incredibly talented musician had an aneurysm buried so deep in her brain that surgeons had to perform a radical, and I mean radical, procedure called cardiac standstill. To operate safely, they had to intentionally stop her heart, flatline her brainwaves entirely, and power her body down to a state that essentially mimics clinical death. To achieve this, they actually cooled her body down to a chilling 60 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 15 degrees Celsius. They stopped her heart, and they physically drained the blood out of her head like draining oil from an engine. Her brainstem stopped responding entirely. By literally every single metric known to modern medicine, she was completely and utterly shut down. And just to make absolutely sure her brain couldn't process any residual sounds, they put molded speakers deep into her ears that clicked at 100 decibels. So she was blindfolded, her ears were blocked with deafening sound, her blood was drained, and her brain was a flatline. Yet she woke up with a story. She perfectly described the totally unique bone saw they used to open her skull. She noted it looked exactly like an electric toothbrush with interchangeable blades sitting in a little case. She even recounted a specific surgeon complaining that her arteries were too small. The surgical team confirmed every single detail of her story. Skeptics try to explain away little pieces of it, but nobody has an explanation that covers the whole shebang simultaneously. And then, oh man, there's Vicky Umipeg. Vicky was blind from birth. Her eyes were unfortunately destroyed as a premature newborn. In 22 years of life, she had never seen anything. Even her dreams were completely devoid of visual images. Yet, after a catastrophic car crash that very nearly killed her, she described watching her own emergency room from up near the ceiling. She recognized her own body down below, not because she knew what her face looked like, but because she recognized her hair and her wedding ring. The very first thing this woman ever visually saw in her entire existence was herself.
And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the crossroads we find ourselves at today. Looking at all this data, you really only have two options. You can believe that the dying brain performs one last spectacularly complex magic trick, hallucinating an experience so perfectly convincing that it fools literally everyone who goes through it. Or you have to concede that something about human consciousness is far less attached to the physical body than modern science currently allows. You can totally pick whichever side makes more sense to you. But what's truly remarkable is that regardless of the mechanism, whether it's pure biology or something else entirely, both sides agree on one profound truth. Dying does not seem to hurt. Mercy seems to be built into the very design of that final minute.
Because when researchers follow up with these survivors years later,
They find people who are fundamentally changed. They're less materialistic, they're much more open with the people they love, and across the board, they are no longer afraid of death. The only people on Earth who possess firsthand experiential knowledge of dying come back far less afraid of it than you and I are. And it leaves us with this incredibly powerful realization. The fear lives entirely on this side. So I'm going to leave you with this question to ponder today. If the ultimate unknown is actually a place of profound peace and clarity, how much of our lives are we wasting by being afraid of the dark? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep questioning everything.